Life in Dallas, Texas, had always seemed perfect from the outside. But behind the walls of our neat suburban home, things were far from ideal. My name is Lisa, and I'm 35 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a local office, and my life revolves around my two children, Mark and Naomi, and my husband, Alan. Alan is a 40-year-old engineer with a cold demeanor that always felt more like a distant ice than a warm embrace. Mark, my 12-year-old son, has always been the apple of Alan's eye. He's bright, handsome, and full of charm. Alan and his mother, Ruth, often dote on him, showering him with praise and affection. On the other hand, Naomi, my 10-year-old daughter, is the exact opposite in their eyes. She has dark black skin, curly hair, and a shy, reserved personality that makes her stand out in ways that aren't always kind. Alan's parents, Ruth and Henry, run a small chain of grocery stores that Alan is set to inherit. Every visit to their house is a reminder of the hierarchy that's been established. Mark is cherished and adored, while Naomi is left in the shadows. I remember the first time I saw the way Ruth looked at Naomi. It wasn't just a glance. It was a cold, dismissive stare that spoke volumes about how she viewed my daughter. One day, while I was preparing dinner, I overheard Alan and Ruth talking in the living room. Their conversation was casual, but it cut like a knife. "Mark is such a smart boy," Ruth said, her voice full of pride. "He's going to do great things, just like his father." Alan's response was equally unsettling. "Yeah, I just wish Naomi could be more like him. Maybe if she had a little more of my genes, she wouldn't be so different." He laughed, but it was a harsh, empty sound. I tried to ignore the sting of those words, focusing instead on keeping the household running smoothly. But every day was a struggle. Naomi felt the weight of their neglect acutely. She would retreat into her room, hiding from the world outside and the cruel comments she couldn't escape. Things were often worse during our visits to Alan's parents. Ruth and Henry's home was a grand place, filled with opulence and the unmistakable smell of privilege. Mark was always the center of attention, his achievements lauded, and his every whim catered to. Naomi, on the other hand, was often ignored or given terse, cold responses. I tried to make up for it with hugs and encouragement, but it was clear that her father and grandparents couldn't see beyond her appearance. One particularly harsh moment stands out in my memory. We were at Ruth and Henry's for dinner. The table was beautifully set, and Mark was regaling everyone with stories from school. Naomi sat quietly at the end of the table, her meal untouched. Ruth's eyes flicked towards her with barely concealed disdain. "Naomi, dear, why don't you eat something? You're so thin. Maybe if you tried harder, you'd be more like your brother." Naomi's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I could see the tears welling in her eyes as she pushed her plate away. Alan's silence was a punch to the gut. He offered no support, no reassurance. It was as if Naomi's pain was inconsequential to him. My heart broke for her, but there was little I could do. Alan's behavior was entrenched, and Ruth and Henry's favoritism was a constant barrier. I found solace in the small moments when Mark and Naomi were away from the critical eyes of Alan's family. At home, I tried to create a safe space for Naomi, filled with love and encouragement, but it often felt like a temporary reprieve. The turning point came one Saturday morning when Ruth offered to take Mark and Naomi to the local zoo. I should have been relieved, thinking it would be a nice day out for them. However, my relief was short-lived. As Ruth returned home later that day, she carried a tired Mark on her back but had left Naomi behind at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone. Panic gripped me as soon as I saw Ruth walking through the door without Naomi. "Where's Naomi?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. Ruth's response was nonchalant. "She's fine. I left her at the zoo. She can manage." Mark was tired, so I brought him home early. I didn't waste another second. I rushed to the zoo, my heart pounding with every step. When I arrived, I found Naomi sitting on a bench, tears streaming down her face. A kind zoo employee was trying to comfort her. Naomi's distress was palpable, and it was clear that she had been abandoned in a place that should have been fun and safe. Seeing Naomi in that state was a wake-up call for me. The neglect and emotional abuse had reached a new, terrifying level. I knew then that things had to change, but the path forward seemed fraught with uncertainty and fear. As we drove home, Naomi's silent tears were a stark reminder of the painful reality we faced. It was clear that my family needed to confront these issues head-on, but the fear of what would come next was overwhelming. The incident at the zoo was a turning point I couldn't ignore, but it was only the beginning of a series of painful realizations. I returned home with Naomi, who had been silent and withdrawn ever since the zoo. Her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by an aura of sadness that I couldn't ignore. I tried to comfort her with kind words and hugs, but nothing seemed to ease her pain. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I knew I had to confront Alan about what had happened. I waited until after the children were asleep, hoping for a calm discussion. Alan came home from work, his demeanor as indifferent as always. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I took a deep breath. "Alan, we need to talk about today," I began, my voice trembling slightly. Alan looked up from his newspaper, his eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "Ruth left Naomi at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone," I said. "She was in tears when I got there. This isn't the first time Naomi's been treated this way." Alan's face hardened. "I've told you before, Naomi is different. She doesn't fit in with our family. Maybe if she were more like Mark, things would be different." His words cut through me like a knife. "Different? You mean because of her skin color and curly hair?" "Alan, she's our daughter. She deserves love and respect, not cruelty." Alan's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't start with this again. I'm tired of your excuses. Naomi's not my fault. If she had been more like Mark, maybe she wouldn't be such a problem." I felt my heart sink. This conversation was leading nowhere, and Alan's lack of empathy was evident. I tried to reason with him, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. The conversation ended with Alan storming out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The following days were no better. Alan's disdain for Naomi was evident in his every action. He openly questioned her paternity, making hurtful remarks about her appearance and intelligence. I often found myself trying to shield Naomi from his harsh words, but the emotional damage was accumulating. One evening, Alan's cruelty reached new heights. He returned home visibly angry, his frustration spilling over. "Naomi's school supplies are a mess," he snapped. "Why does she need so many? She's not even trying to do well in school. She's failing, and it's time she started paying back for everything we've done for her." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Alan's words were a devastating blow. He demanded that Naomi quit school and start working to contribute to the family. It was a crushing blow to her self-esteem and her future. Naomi had always been a dedicated student, but Alan's oppressive demands were suffocating her spirit. I knew I had to take action, but fear gripped me. Our financial situation was precarious, and I wasn't sure how we could manage on our own. Alan's job as an engineer provided the bulk of our income, and I had only a modest salary. The thought of leaving him seemed impossible, given our financial instability. Yet, as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the toll Alan's behavior was taking on Naomi. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with sadness, and her academic performance suffered as she struggled to cope with the emotional weight. I felt a growing urgency to protect her from further harm. Then, one rainy evening, I reached my breaking point. Alan had come home, his temper flaring after a bad day at work. He stormed into the living room, his anger palpable. "I've had enough of Naomi's excuses," he shouted. "She's not contributing anything to this family. If she wants to stay, she needs to start working and paying us back." Naomi, who had been quietly sitting in her room, overheard the argument. She came out with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please don't make me leave school. I want to learn. I want to be someone." Seeing her so broken was the final straw. I couldn't let Alan continue to destroy Naomi's spirit. As I looked at my daughter, I realized that our situation was unsustainable. It wasn't just about financial security anymore. It was about our emotional well-being and our right to live without fear and cruelty. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't keep enduring this abuse and neglect. I had to protect Naomi, even if it meant facing the unknown. I resolved to leave Alan, to seek a safer and healthier environment for my children. The thought of leaving behind our home and facing financial uncertainty was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I gathered our essential belongings, trying to stay as organized as possible while managing my growing anxiety. Mark, who had recently moved into his own apartment, was supportive when I reached out to him. He offered us a place to stay, and his support gave me the strength I needed. With heavy hearts and rain pouring down outside, I packed up Naomi and our belongings. It was a bittersweet farewell to a life that had been filled with pain and neglect. As we drove to Mark's apartment, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and fear. We were leaving behind everything we had known, but we were also stepping into a future where we could rebuild our lives and find the happiness and respect that had long been denied to us. As we arrived at Mark's apartment, I looked at Naomi, who was still apprehensive but hopeful. We were about to start a new chapter, one that I hoped would bring us the peace and love we so desperately needed. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I knew it was a journey worth taking for the sake of my children and their future. Leaving Alan was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. As we settled into Mark's apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was a new beginning, but it came with its own set of challenges. Mark, at just 21, had managed to carve out a small but comfortable life for himself. His apartment was modest, but it was a safe haven for Naomi and me. Naomi was initially quiet, overwhelmed by the changes and the emotional strain she had endured. I tried to create a sense of normalcy for her, encouraging her to focus on her studies and hobbies. Mark, though young, was incredibly supportive. He made sure we felt welcomed and at ease, always checking in to see if we needed anything. As weeks turned into months, Naomi began to open up more. She started to show signs of her old self. Her laughter came back, and she regained her enthusiasm for school. It was a slow process, but each small step was a victory. Mark and I worked hard to provide a stable environment, making sure Naomi felt loved and secure. One day, while Mark was at work, I took Naomi to a local community center. They had a variety of activities and programs, including tutoring and art classes. Naomi had always enjoyed painting, so I signed her up for an art class. I watched as she immersed herself in her work, her face lighting up with the joy of creation. It was a stark contrast to the sadness she had shown during the final days at home with Alan. During this period, I also started looking for a job. The financial strain was real, and I knew I needed to contribute to our household. Finding a job was challenging, but I was determined to make it work. After several interviews and rejections, I finally secured a position as an administrative assistant at a local firm. It wasn't a dream job, but it provided stability and helped us get back on our feet. Life in Dallas began to take on a semblance of normalcy. Naomi continued to thrive in school and her art classes, while Mark and I adjusted to our new routines. We began to explore the city, discovering new parks, libraries, and restaurants. The simple joys of everyday life started to heal the wounds from our past. One day, while Mark and I were at home discussing plans for the weekend, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. On the other end was Ruth, Alan's mother. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Lisa, I hope you're well," she began. "I've been trying to reach you." I was taken aback. Ruth had been a harsh critic of Naomi, and I had not expected to hear from her. "Why are you calling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to apologize for how we treated Naomi," Ruth said, her voice trembling slightly. "Alan has been having a hard time since he left. He's lost his job and the grocery stores. We're struggling, and I've realized how wrong we were." I listened in silence, feeling a mix of emotions. Ruth's apology seemed sincere, but it also stirred up old wounds. "I appreciate your apology, Ruth," I said finally. "But Naomi and I have moved on. We've worked hard to build a new life, and we're finally finding some peace." Ruth's voice was tinged with regret. "I understand. I just wanted to reach out and let you know that I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change the past, but I wanted to say it." We ended the call on a somber note. Ruth's apology was a small but significant acknowledgement of the wrongs done to Naomi. It didn't undo the damage, but it was a step toward closure. As we continued to rebuild our lives, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. Naomi was excelling in school, making new friends, and developing her artistic talent. Mark was thriving in his job and had even begun to date someone he cared about. I was finding my own footing in my new job, and despite the challenges, there was a sense of hope in our lives. But just when it seemed like everything was settling, another unexpected twist emerged. Alan, now unemployed and struggling, showed up at Mark's apartment. He looked disheveled and exhausted. My heart sank at the sight of him. The man who had caused so much pain was standing on our doorstep. Mark answered the door, his expression a mix of shock and concern. Alan tried to explain his situation, but the words were hollow. He spoke of losing his job, his house, and how he had ended up homeless. He was seeking reconciliation, desperate for forgiveness. As I stood in the background, I felt a surge of emotions. Anger, sadness, and confusion swirled within me. Alan's presence was a painful reminder of the past, but it also highlighted how far we had come. The family we had left behind was now in turmoil, while we were slowly finding our way to a better future. This unexpected visit from Alan was a harsh reminder of the past, but it also reinforced our resolve to stay true to the life we had built. Naomi, Mark, and I had come so far, and the prospect of returning to the old, painful dynamics was something we could no longer entertain. As Alan left, his pleas unanswered, I took a deep breath and looked at Naomi and Mark. We had survived the storm, and we were emerging stronger and more resilient. Our journey wasn't over, but we were navigating it together, with hope and determination guiding us forward. Years passed, and our lives continued to unfold in ways I had only dreamed of during the hardest times. Naomi, now a confident and accomplished young woman, was preparing for her wedding. The thought of her walking down the aisle filled me with pride and joy, a testament to how far we had come from the dark days of our past. Mark, too, had found his path. He was well established in his career and had met someone special. His happiness and success were heartwarming to witness, and I couldn't have been more proud of the man he had become. Our new family dynamic was loving and supportive, and it was a stark contrast to the toxicity we had once known. As Naomi's wedding day approached, our lives were filled with anticipation and excitement. The preparations were in full swing, and Naomi was radiant in her joy. Her wedding dress, chosen with care, fit perfectly, and every detail of the ceremony was thoughtfully planned. I watched her with a mixture of disbelief and happiness, marveling at the strength and grace she had developed over the years. The wedding day was beautiful. Naomi walked down the aisle, looking every bit the princess she deserved to be. The ceremony was intimate, surrounded by friends and family who had supported us through thick and thin. Naomi's happiness was contagious, and it was clear to everyone that she had found someone who cherished her for who she was. During the reception, as I looked around at the smiling faces, I was reminded of the long journey we had taken to get here. It was a moment of reflection, a time to appreciate the resilience and love that had carried us through the darkest times. Naomi danced with her new husband, and Mark gave a heartfelt toast, celebrating his sister's happiness and the new chapter in our lives. However, amidst the joy, there was one figure missing from our celebration: Alan. The pain he had caused was still fresh, and the decision to exclude him from this pivotal moment was both easy and necessary. We had moved on from the hurt he inflicted, and including him in such a special occasion felt wrong. The absence of his presence was a testament to the boundaries we had set to protect our newfound peace. The final twist in our journey came when, just a few weeks after the wedding, I had an unexpected encounter. I was out shopping when I saw Ruth, Alan's mother. She looked different, older and wearier. I had heard that she had fallen on hard times, much like Alan. Ruth approached me hesitantly, her face etched with a mix of hope and regret. "Lisa," she said, her voice trembling, "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to see how Naomi and Mark are. I've heard they're doing great." I was taken aback, but maintained my composure. They're doing well, Ruth. Naomi is now happily married, and Mark is thriving in his career. We've built a good life for ourselves. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I'm glad to hear that. I'm so sorry for everything that—
It all began when I was 17 years old. Currently, I am a 21-year-old female. I won't go into detail about my troubled relationship with my dad, but suffice it to say that it was bumpy. I was the one who had to tread carefully around my step-parents since my stepsister, a 20-year-old girl, was the golden child. I felt this constant animosity from my stepsister. She decided to ruin my life even though I hadn't done anything to deserve it. Also, her mom always seemed to back her up and would occasionally join in on my stepsister's antics to really bring me down. My father would always agree with my stepmother and punish me according to the false accusations they made against me, since he would never go against his wife. Despite my best efforts, I soon recognized that no one in that house had any concern for my well-being, so I retreated. I became so reclusive that I hardly spoke to them. It appears that this truly irritated my stepsister, because she has dedicated her life to ensuring that I am as unhappy as possible. My dad's pricey watch mysteriously vanished one day. He took great pride in this watch. It wasn't like any other. When I got home from school, my dad was irate. My stepmom glared at me, and my stepsister pretended not to notice that it had disappeared. Though I couldn't put my finger on it, I sensed that something was amiss. My stepmom then suddenly began accusing me of stealing the watch. My recent unusual behavior and need for attention led her to conclude that I must have stolen it. Naturally, my stepsister supported her, claiming that she noticed me behaving suspiciously when I was in my dad's room. For the record, the only suspicious behavior I exhibited was while I was grieving the loss of my cat, a companion of mine since the age of 3. Obviously, I needed attention badly. Even though I couldn't live with my mom after my parents' divorce, my cat was the one constant in my life. My dad demanded that we all eat dinner together every night, and my behavior for desperate attention consisted of sobbing at a couple of those meals. It was solely because my stepsister repeatedly made fun of how much better the house seemed without my ugly creature that I finally snapped. My stepsister was never advised by my dad to quit being cold-hearted. Just telling me to calm down was all he did. Regardless, the reasons my stepmother and stepsister were pointing the finger at me came as a total surprise to me. I had no idea the watch had gone lost, much less been involved in any way. My attempts at self-defense met with nothing more than ineffectiveness. Even before I told my dad, he was sold. I had to get out of there because he went off on me and said I was no different from my mother, whom he had a history of calling a maniac and a crazy person. He immediately expelled me. I was 17 years old. Apart from my mom's house, I didn't have a clue where to go or what to do. My dad remained silent for the subsequent 4 years. Nothing happened, not even a response to my attempts to clear my name via text or phone. They couldn't care less that I didn't steal the watch, even though I knew it deep within. All the blame had been placed on me by my stepsister and stepmother, and my dad had done nothing to stop them. His acceptance of their story without seeking my approval greatly wounded me. I did my best to put the betrayal in the past and focus on getting back on my feet. The majority of my time was devoted to taking care of my mentally unstable mother. The fact that I was able to spend quality time with her is the only silver lining. Not only did I make it through high school, but I also made it through college. Neither of the events included my dad. Even though it hurt a lot at first, the agony gradually subsided over the years. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. My grandpa was turning 75, and despite everything, I was invited to his birthday party at a farmhouse he rented for the day. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go at first because I knew my dad, stepmom, and stepsister would be there. But Grandpa and I had always been close. He was there for me when my dad kicked me out. He lived in a retirement home, so he couldn't offer me a place to stay, but he helped me a lot financially. He was also my best friend. So I knew I couldn't miss such a big milestone for him. I decided to suck it up and go. When I walked into the party, I immediately felt all the old tension come back. Seeing my dad again after 4 years, sitting with my stepmom and stepsister like nothing had happened, made my stomach churn. I kept my distance, but every time I looked at them, I felt a lump in my throat and had to fight back tears. I mostly hung out with other relatives and avoided any interaction with them. My stepsister didn't even look at me, and my stepmom had this smug look on her face, making me feel worse. I wanted to confront them in front of everyone, but I knew I couldn't ruin Grandpa's day. Then something unexpected happened. Grandpa gave a toast. At first, he thanked everyone for coming and talked about how blessed he was. But then, out of nowhere, he brought up my dad's missing watch. He revealed that my stepsister had stolen it. I made regarding where I stand with my father. Now I don't know what to do. My dad has been trying to contact me nonstop since the party. Initially, most of his texts and voice messages were him apologizing and asking for forgiveness. He was saying that he was wrong and that he wanted to make things right. Then they slowly started becoming about how I had apparently brainwashed his father and tried to ruin his relationship with my stepmother. Of course, that hurt a lot. I mean, is there any way that this man would choose me over his rotten wife and daughter? Sorry, that was mean, but I don't know what to do with how I feel. My dad is still asking to meet me and talk about everything that happened. I don't know what to do. I don't think that my dad will apologize for anything, especially after his last few texts about me brainwashing Grandpa. But on the off chance that he does apologize, I don't know if I can ever trust him again. It's been 4 years of feeling like I didn't matter to him, that he could just toss me aside like that. As for my stepsister and stepmom, I haven't heard a word from them, and honestly, I don't want to. They ruined my relationship with my dad and turned my life upside down. I don't think I could ever forgive them for that. So AATA for not wanting to see my dad or forgive him and for still feeling bitter about everything that happened. Update 1. It's been a week since I last posted here, and I've lost count of the number of comments and messages I got begging me for an update. So here it is. First of all, thank you to everyone who commented and empathized with me. Thank you for all the advice and your criticisms. Also, it's crazy how many people actually cared about what I was going through. A lot of you told me to go no contact with my dad, while others suggested giving him a chance to explain. Well, I ended up deciding to meet with him, even though my gut was screaming not to. I don't really know why I agreed to it. Maybe I just wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, though I wasn't sure if he deserved that. But deep down, there was a small part of me that hoped that he'd finally show some real remorse and prove that he was sorry for what he did. So I texted him back and agreed to meet at a cafe we used to go to when I was younger. I figured it was a good neutral ground. When I walked in, I saw him sitting there, looking kind of nervous. It was weird seeing him after so long, especially after everything that went down at Grandpa's party. For a second, I thought maybe things could go back to how they used to be. But that feeling didn't last long. He started by apologizing, saying he knew he'd messed up and that he was sorry for believing my stepmom and stepsister. He talked about how hard it's been for him since the truth came out and how he feels like he failed as a father. At first, I was starting to soften. I thought that there was a tiny chance of us being able to at least try to rebuild some kind of relationship. But then things took a turn. He went on this long rant about how he'd been under so much pressure back then, and that he didn't know what to believe. Which, I mean, okay, I get it, but that doesn't excuse how he tossed me aside for 4 years. Then he began to actually accuse me of manipulating Grandpa. He said that he wasn't entirely convinced I didn't somehow stir the pot to make Grandpa turn against him and embarrass his family in front of everyone. I was so shocked by my dad's accusation that I couldn't even say anything initially. I mean, the guy basically admitted he still didn't fully trust me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I just sat there and stared at him while I tried to process how he could say something like that. All those texts about him wanting to make things right, and now he wanted me to apologize. At that point, I started to realize this meeting was a huge mistake. He wasn't here to apologize, at least not genuinely. He just wanted to clear his own conscience or shift some of the blame onto me. I called him out on it and told him that it wasn't fair for him to put any of this on me. I reminded him that he was the one who chose to believe my stepsister and stepmom without even giving me a chance to defend myself. But instead of taking responsibility, he doubled down, saying I was being unfair to him and that it wasn't his fault because they, meaning my stepmom and stepsister, had tricked him. He even suggested that maybe I should forgive them because family is family. That was it for me. I couldn't listen to any more excuses. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught up in the mess and was embarrassed in front of the whole family. I told him I didn't want to hear from him anymore unless he could genuinely take responsibility for his actions. Then I got up and left. Since that meeting, I felt weird. At least that's the best way I can put it. I'm relieved that I finally confronted him and saw his true colors. But I'm angry that he still couldn't just own up to what he did. He's still more concerned about how everything looks to the rest of the family than actually repairing our relationship. I feel like I've wasted so much time hoping for some kind of closure, only to realize it's never going to happen. Update 2. Okay, so I was not planning on updating again, but things have gotten wild. I thought I was done with all this drama, but apparently my family had other plans. Remember how I said my dad, stepmom, and stepsister were still trying to spin the situation? Well, let's just say that backfired spectacularly. After that meeting with my dad, I went no contact. I was done. I blocked his number and ignored any family members who tried to guilt me into giving him another chance. 2 weeks later, my grandpa called me and asked if I could come over to talk. I wasn't sure what it was about, but since Grandpa was the only one who had my back through all of this, I figured I'd hear him out. Grandpa essentially told me that he had come across some evidence while going through old financial records of the company. He had been suspicious for a while, especially after everything that happened with the watch, and decided to do some digging. What he found shocked even him. It turns out my stepsister and stepmom had been running a whole string of scams behind everyone's backs for years. This wasn't just about the watch. They had been siphoning money from the company's accounts, my dad's accounts, and taking out credit in my dad's name, racking up debt they'd hidden from the rest of the family. How did Grandpa find out? Well, turns out my stepsister had a really bad understanding of how credit cards worked. I don't think she realized that while making purchases out of the company's accounts, my grandpa would have been able to see where all the transactions had been made. When my grandpa saw transactions for nail appointments and hair blowouts, he knew for a fact that it wasn't my dad. My stepmother had always kept her nails clipped and was very adamant about never ruining her hair with heat. So, the next obvious suspect was my stepsister. Not only that, but he also found a fake loan under my dad's name that my stepmom took out to fund my stepsister's expensive habits. This wasn't just a one-time thing. They had been doing this for years, and my dad had no clue. Grandpa decided he'd had enough of their lies. But instead of pressing charges, he took matters into his own hands in the way only Grandpa could. He went straight to his lawyer and disinherited my dad. Yeah, he cut him out of the will entirely. Everything, and I mean everything, that was supposed to go to my dad is now going somewhere else, including a hefty chunk that's coming to me. Grandpa said that by siding with my stepmom and stepsister for all these years, my dad had proven that he wasn't responsible enough to handle the family's legacy. Not only that, but the fact that my dad kicked me out with nowhere to go, and even after the truth came to light, still refused to apologize to me, made Grandpa want to leave my dad with absolutely nothing. As for my stepsister and stepmom, they're pretty much screwed. Grandpa didn't stop at just disinheriting my dad. He also made sure that my stepsister and stepmom couldn't get their hands on a dime of family money. He got his lawyer to block them from accessing any of the trusts or family assets. So everything they thought they were going to get their greedy little hands on, gone. Grandpa is even helping my dad sell his house so that none of them can continue to leech off him financially. They're going to be completely cut off. Oh, that's not all. Apparently, when my stepmom found out what Grandpa had done, she lost it. And I mean a full-on meltdown. She tried to guilt-trip my dad into fighting back against Grandpa, but there's nothing they can do legally. My dad's stuck because he didn't protect his finances, and now he's basically at the mercy of whatever my stepmom and stepsister want to do next. And here's the kicker. My stepsister had the nerve to try and reach out to me after all of this went down. I got this pathetic message from her where she was basically begging for help because she doesn't have any money left to cover her bills or lifestyle now that Grandpa's cut them off. She even tried to spin this sob story about how she never meant for things to get so bad and that she's just been under pressure from our stepmom this whole time. Honestly, the fact that she had the nerve to text me about her struggles, when she was the reason I was out in the streets at the age of 17, made me see red. Even when she was reaching out to me, she could not seem to take responsibility for her actions, and instead blamed it on her mother. I sent her a short response, basically telling her that she made her bed, and now she has to lie in it. I don't feel bad for her at all. She and her mom ruined my relationship with my dad and tried to destroy my life, so why should I care what happens to them now? Grandpa warned me that they might try to turn this back on me, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to paint me as the bad guy again. Which brings me to my dad. He's a wreck. He keeps calling and texting, but I've only responded once. I told him that until he's ready to fully take responsibility and stop blaming other people for what happened, I'm not interested in having a relationship. I can't keep putting myself through this cycle of betrayal and forgiveness, only to get hurt all over again. There's still a lot up in the air, especially with how my dad's handling everything. Part of me wonders if he'll ever fully cut ties with my stepmom and stepsister, or if he's just too deep in their lives to see the truth. I guess we'll see. Right now, I'm focusing on myself, but something tells me this isn't over yet. Update 3. Well, here we are. I wasn't sure if I'd be posting another update, but a lot has happened and I thought it would be a good time to tie up all the loose ends. If you've been following my story, you'll know that my life has been one wild roller coaster of family drama. But I can finally say that things are looking up for me, and not so much for the rest of my family. After Grandpa disinherited my dad and cut off my stepmom and stepsister from all the family money, things took a serious turn for them. My dad is in financial freefall. Grandpa wasn't kidding when he said he was getting that house sold. Turns out he wasn't just helping my dad sell it, he was forcing it. See, Grandpa technically owns the property, and my dad was just living there under some fancy trust arrangement that Grandpa controlled. So when my grandpa cut off all financial ties with my dad, it meant that the house my dad was living in was also no longer his to live in. Grandpa gave my dad a chance and told him that he'd let him stay there as long as he kicked my stepmom and stepsister out. Of course, my dad could never turn his back on the woman who ruined his life. He insists on blaming Grandpa or myself for the outcome, and he refuses to accept the reality of the situation. He still denies that my stepmom and stepsister persuaded him. Our relationship will remain dormant until he admits his role in this mess. Despite how awful it is, I've decided to accept it. In contrast, Grandpa is thriving. He's been there for me every step of the way, and our bond has only strengthened since the truth has emerged. We've had several conversations on the future, and he has expressed his desire to ensure my well-being, particularly in light of what I've been through. This is, I suppose, the final chapter of this tale. At last, my step-parents, my dad, stepmother, and stepsister, are taking responsibility for their deeds, and I can go on with my life. Both monetarily and psychologically, I have come a long way since then. Never again will I allow any of them to bring me down. It has been quite a journey, but I am pleased with my final destination. Everyone who helped me out by leaving comments is deeply appreciated. I intend to return to this place, perhaps in 5 years, to inform you of the remarkable improvement in my life.
I'm Carrie, and I was 4 when my life changed forever. That's when my sister Emily was born, and suddenly, I became invisible in my own home. My earliest memories are filled with the sound of Emily singing. By the time she was 3, she had already become the star of every family gathering, while I stood in the corner, holding plates of snacks I'd helped Mom prepare. Emily had this angelic voice that made everyone stop and listen. My parents, Tom and Linda, were convinced she'd be the next Mariah Carey. "Carrie, go help your sister practice her scales," Mom would say, not even looking up from her phone where she was recording yet another video of Emily's performance. "And make sure you've done the dishes first." I was 8 then, and Emily was 4. While she twirled around the living room in her pink tutu, I was learning how to use the washing machine because Mom was too busy coordinating Emily's singing lessons. "Why can't I go to Sarah's birthday party?" I asked one Saturday morning when I was 12. Mom rolled her eyes. "Because Emily has a performance at the community center, and we need you to help with her costume changes." "But I promised Sarah." "Don't be selfish, Carrie," Dad cut in. "Your sister needs you. She's got real talent, unlike," he stopped himself, but I knew what he meant. "Unlike me." I remember the day everything changed. Emily was 11, and I was 15. She and her friends had gone to the mall without supervision, something I'd never been allowed to do at that age. They spent hours at the ice cream parlor, ordering sundae after sundae, competing to see who could eat the most. The next morning, Emily woke up with a sore throat. It got worse quickly, developing into a severe case of strep that left her vocal cords damaged. The doctor said she might never sing the same way again. I was in the kitchen doing homework when they came back from the hospital. "This is your fault," Mom screamed at me. "You're her older sister. You should have been watching her." "But I was doing the laundry and cleaning the bathroom like you told me." "No excuses." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "You're grounded for a month. No phone, no TV, no nothing. Maybe that'll teach you to take responsibility." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made myself a promise. Someday, I'd build a life where I didn't have to live in anyone's shadow. I just had to survive a few more years in this house where I was nothing more than a servant and a scapegoat. The next 3 years passed in a blur of chores, blame, and quiet resentment. Every time Emily got into trouble, sneaking out, skipping classes, or borrowing Mom's credit card, somehow it circled back to being my fault. The acceptance letter from State College sat on the kitchen table between us, next to Mom's meatloaf. I'd chosen dinner time deliberately, they couldn't easily escape the conversation. "It's the most affordable option," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The tuition is reasonable, Anne." "We don't have the money, Carrie." Dad didn't even look up from his plate. Emily snickered from her seat. "Maybe you should have developed some actual talents, instead of just doing chores all day." "You could take out a loan for me," I pressed on, ignoring her. "I'll write you a receipt, promising to pay back every penny once I graduate and get a job. Please, this is important to me." Mom sighed that martyred sigh she'd perfected over the years. "Honey, we're not taking out any loans. College isn't for everyone. Why don't you look for a job at the mall? Or maybe that new cafe downtown? But I got a scholarship that covers part of the tuition. I just need help with the rest. I've researched everything, made a budget." "Enough." Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "We said no loans. End of discussion. Some people are meant for college, others aren't. Accept it and move on." I stared at my untouched dinner, fighting back tears. Through blurred vision, I saw Emily smirking, enjoying the show as always. That night, I called my best friend Rachel. We'd been close since middle school, bonding over our shared love of math and our positions as outsiders, me because of my family situation, her because her Korean immigrant parents owned the popular Golden Dragon restaurant downtown. They won't help, I sobbed into the phone. They won't even consider taking out a loan. All these years of straight A's, of doing everything right, and they won't even try. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Come over tomorrow. My parents want to talk to you. The next evening, I sat in the restaurant's office with Rachel and her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kim, after closing time. They'd known me for years. I'd spent countless afternoons doing homework in their restaurant, escaping my chaotic home. We've watched you grow up, Carrie, Mrs. Kim said. You're like second daughter to us. Rachel told us everything. Mr. Kim nodded. We will pay your tuition. I started to protest, but he held up his hand. You will work here part-time after classes. Good wages, flexible schedule. Pay us back slowly, no interest. This is investment in your future. After a while, I moved into my dorm room at State College. My parents barely noticed when I packed my things. They were too busy planning Emily's big piano recital, their latest attempt to find her a new talent to replace her lost singing voice. I started classes during the day and worked evenings at Golden Dragon, learning everything from waiting tables to managing inventory. The call came on a random Tuesday during my sophomore year. I was studying in the library when Mom's number flashed on my phone screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart racing. We hadn't spoken in months. Hey, sweetie, she said, sounding distracted. There was noise in the background, probably Emily practicing something new. Just checking in. What have you been up to? I'm in college, I replied, waiting for the questions about money, about how I was managing without their help. Oh, that's nice, she said vaguely. Emily's getting straight A's in her advanced classes. We're so proud. She's really finding herself since, the voice thing. No questions came about how I was paying for school. They didn't care enough to ask, and I didn't volunteer the information. The conversation ended as quickly as it had begun, with Mom hung up. During my college years, I only went home for major holidays. Each visit was the same, relatives crowded around our dining table while Emily held court and my parents beamed. I'd help in the kitchen, same as always, listening to the chatter from the other room about Emily's latest achievements. Thanksgiving of my junior year hit differently though. I was setting out the sweet potato casserole when Aunt Susan started asking about Emily's college plans. Mom proudly announced, we'd been saving for years. Our little star's education fund is all set. We've put aside enough for her to go anywhere she wants. I nearly dropped the casserole. The ceramic dish burned my hands through the oven mitts, but it wasn't as painful as the truth I was hearing. 2 years ago, they'd claimed poverty when I needed help. Now I knew, they'd been hoarding money all along, just not for me. That night, in my old bedroom, I called Rachel and cried. They had the money, I whispered, huddled under my childhood blanket. They just didn't think I was worth spending it on. Then prove them wrong, she said firmly. You're already doing it. She was right. I threw myself into my studies and my work at Golden Dragon. By graduation, I'd not only paid back every cent to the Kims, but had also learned every aspect of running a successful business. I'd worked my way up from waitress to shift supervisor to assistant manager, all while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. Mr. Kim called me into his office on my last day at the restaurant. I have friend at Morgan & Chase Corporate, he said, sliding a business card across his desk. They need someone smart, hardworking. Someone like you. I told him about how you transformed our inventory system, increased efficiency by 30%. He very interested. A week after graduation, I walked into my new office at Morgan & Chase, wearing a suit I'd bought with my own money. My desk nameplate read Caroline Mitchell, Junior Analyst. Within 6 months, I was leading my own team. By the end of my first year, I'd gotten 2 promotions and was managing projects that caught the attention of senior leadership. Christmas came around again, and something felt off the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house was dark except for the living room window, no cars lined the street, and the usual elaborate decorations were missing. Mom answered the door in an old sweater instead of her usual holiday attire. "Emily's not coming?" I asked, stepping into the oddly quiet house. The familiar scent of Mom's traditional Christmas roast was noticeably absent. "She's celebrating with friends," Mom said, wringing her hands. "Their families rented a cabin up in the mountains. Very exclusive." The dining room table, usually groaning under the weight of Mom's extensive holiday spread, held only a store-bought ham and some microwaved sides. No relatives bustled about, no Christmas music played. Dad sat in his armchair, looking older than I remembered. "We've had some setbacks," Mom finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Dad, who nodded slightly. "The investment your father made didn't pan out. We had to take out loans to cover the losses. Christmas with the whole family just wasn't in the budget this year." I watched them pick at their food, these people who'd once seemed so powerful, who'd controlled every aspect of my life. Now they looked small, defeated. Despite everything, something twisted in my chest. "Give me a minute," I said, pulling out my phone. I scrolled through delivery options, thank God for restaurants that stayed open on Christmas. 20 minutes and several $100s later, I'd ordered a feast: prime rib, glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, 3 different pies. The food arrived in elegant packaging, filling the house with the rich aromas of a proper Christmas dinner. As we ate, I caught Mom eyeing my designer watch, the silk blouse that cost more than their monthly utility bill. "We've been thinking," she said carefully, sharing a look with Dad. "Since you're in such a good position now, maybe you could help us out? Just temporarily, until we get back on our feet." I studied them over my wine glass. Part of me wanted to remind them of their words when I'd begged for college money: "Some people are meant for college, others aren't." But looking at their worn faces, I couldn't do it. "I could set up an additional card on my account," I heard myself saying. "With a monthly limit." Mom's eyes lit up. "Oh, sweetheart, that would be $1,000 a month," I said firmly. "No more." They nodded eagerly. It was more than they'd expected, though less than a week's pay for me now. A few days later, I had the card issued and delivered to Mom. They promised to be careful with it, to respect the limit. For several months, they kept their word. The charges were reasonable: groceries, utilities, basic necessities. I barely noticed the money leaving my account. Sometimes, reviewing the statements, I'd see charges from the grocery store where I'd worked one summer during high school, trying to save for college. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years passed, and I foolishly thought things were getting better. The monthly allowance had created a rhythm to our relationship. Mom would call to chat about their expenses, and somehow that evolved into actual conversations. Or so I thought. Emily and I even started talking again, though her competitive streak hadn't changed. Every time I mentioned a work achievement, her smile would tighten, her eyes would narrow just slightly, telltale signs I remembered from childhood. "Senior project manager? That's nice," she'd say, in the same tone she used to dismiss my high school achievements. "I'm actually up for promotion at Wilson & Company. It's a smaller firm, but very exclusive. Not everyone can handle the pressure there." Mom and Dad couldn't stop talking about Emily's new boyfriend, James. "He comes from such good stock," Mom would gush during our monthly calls. "His parents owned that real estate company downtown." The monthly charges on Mom's card had stayed reasonable all this time: groceries, utilities, the occasional dinner out. Normal things, expected things. I'd even started to feel good about helping them, like maybe this financial support was healing our fractured relationship. Then came the Instagram post that shattered everything. "Paradise with my loves. Engaged, Hawaii, blessed," Emily's caption read. The photo showed her and James on a pristine beach, our parents and his beaming beside them. Mrs. Anderson, James's mother, wore a designer sundress. Mr. Anderson stood proudly next to his son, one hand on James's shoulder. My finger froze mid-scroll. When had this happened? Why hadn't they told me? The next post made my blood run cold, so grateful to Mom and Dad for making this magical engagement trip possible for everyone. They insisted on treating both families to this dream vacation. Best parents ever. Sponsored by Love. Something clicked in my brain. I opened my banking app, hands shaking. There they were, the charges on Mom's card, far exceeding the monthly limit I'd set: 6 round-trip first-class tickets to Honolulu, $12,400, Grand Wailea Resort, 3 Ocean View suites for 7 nights, $18,600, welcome dinner at Morimoto, $2,800, couple spa treatments, $1,200, sunset sailing excursion, $1,600, private beachfront dinner arrangement, $3,500. They'd used my money to fund their secret family vacation, one I hadn't been invited to. They'd thrown an elaborate engagement celebration for Emily and her future in-laws, all while excluding the person who was actually paying for it. My hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times to dial Mom's number. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Hello? Mom's voice was breezy, casual. Hawaiian music played in the background, along with the sound of waves and clinking glasses. Laughter. I recognized Emily's distinctive giggle. Where are you? I kept my voice steady, professional, the same tone I used in difficult board meetings when dealing with hostile clients. Oh, honey. She hesitated, the music growing fainter as if she was moving away from the party. Your father and I just decided to take a little break. Get some rest. You know how hard things have been lately. A little break? I pulled up the banking app again, my free hand clenching into a fist. At the Grand Wailea Resort? With Emily, James, and his entire family? That kind of break costs over $40,000, Mom. My $40,000. Silence. Then muffled voices. Mom was covering the phone, but I could still make out fragments. She knows. What should I? Emily, maybe you should. Mom, why did you use my card to pay for everyone's trip? And why wasn't I invited to my own sister's engagement party? More muffled conversation, then rustling as the phone changed hands. When the new voice came on the line, Emily's words dripped with contempt. Listen, Miss Executive, she sneered. You're not needed here. You're not even family anymore, just a walking ATM. We don't want you here ruining everything with your little success story. Nobody wants to hear about your precious career while we're celebrating my engagement. The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm. That ATM just paid $20,000 for your little party. Another $20,000 for the flights and extras. That's my money paying for your perfect family moment. Yeah? Emily laughed, harsh and cold. Well, that's what you're good for, isn't it? You keep working your fancy job, and we'll enjoy spending your money. It's the only thing you're useful for anyway. Always was, even when we were kids. At least now you're finally serving a purpose. The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately. No answer from Mom. Straight to voicemail. I tried Dad's number, same thing. Emily's phone rang once. Before going to voicemail, she'd declined the call. Within minutes, notification after notification popped up on my phone. User has blocked you on every social media platform we shared. My parents' profiles disappeared first, then Emily's. A single message came through from Mom before she blocked my number. We're all tired of your attitude and jealousy. Just leave us alone. You've ruined enough special moments for Emily. I stared at the message, something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I opened the banking app again, this time navigating to the travel reservations section. Each click felt like breaking another link in the chain that had bound me to their abuse for so long. Click. The hotel reservations for 3 luxury Ocean View suites, cancelled. Click. The couple's massage packages and sunset sailing excursions, cancelled. Click. The private beachfront dinner arrangements, cancelled. Click. The return first-class flight tickets for 6 people, cancelled. Click, Mom's card, permanently deactivated. I set down my phone and waited, imagining their faces when the hotel informed them their rooms weren't paid for, when they tried to charge something to the room and got declined, when they discovered their return flights no longer existed. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. Call after call lit up my screen, Mom, Dad, Emily, and numbers I didn't recognize with Hawaii area codes. The Anderson family, no doubt, wondering why their luxury vacation had suddenly turned into a nightmare. The messages started flooding in through every platform they'd unblocked me on. Mom, Carrie, please call us immediately. This is an emergency. Dad, fix this right now, young lady. You're embarrassing the whole family. Emily, you better make this right or I swear to God. Unknown number, this is James. My parents are furious. You need to reinstate those reservations. The tone shifted as the hours passed. Mom, sweetie, please. We can talk about this. Dad, we'll pay you back, just help us out here. Emily, come on, Carrie. It's my engagement. Don't be so petty. James, my parents are threatening to call this whole thing off. I left them all unread, then systematically blocked every number and account. But not before taking screenshots. I had a feeling I'd need them. The notification came around midnight. Emily Mitchell has posted a new status. I can't believe my own sister would try to ruin the happiest moment of my life. She's always been jealous of my happiness, but this is a new low. Canceling our entire family's vacation out of spite? Who does that to their own sister's engagement celebration? Some people just can't stand to see others happy. Toxic family, heartbroken. The comments poured in immediately. Oh my God, that's horrible. What kind of sister does that? I always knew there was something off about her. She's just jealous because you're getting married first. Your poor parents must be so embarrassed. I had stayed quiet long enough. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I crafted my response. Let me tell you what really happened. My parents have been using my credit card for basic expenses, limited to $1,000 a month. Yesterday, I discovered they'd spent over $40,000 of my money to fund a luxury Hawaii vacation for Emily's engagement. They didn't ask. They didn't tell me. They didn't invite me. When I called to ask why, Emily told me I wasn't family, just a walking ATM, my mother's final message before blocking me? We're all tired of you. So yes, I canceled the reservations I never authorized. I canceled the return flights I never agreed to pay for. I stopped funding the vacation I wasn't welcome to attend. Here are the screenshots of every message. Here are the credit card statements. Here's the truth about your poor Emily and her ruined engagement party. Judge for yourselves who the toxic ones really are. The tide turned immediately. Comments shifted from condemnation to support. Oh my God, Emily, how could you? Using your sister's money while excluding her? That's cruel. Those poor Andersons, getting caught up in this family's drama. Carrie, you did the right thing. Stay strong. The aftermath unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned the full extent of the chaos I'd unleashed in Hawaii. My parents had to borrow money from 3 different friends just to book economy flights home. They'd been forced to check out of the Grand Wailea Resort in front of all the other guests. Emily had thrown a tantrum in the lobby that ended up on TikTok. The real explosion came when the Andersons realized they'd have to pay for their own accommodations. They'd been promised a fully paid luxury vacation, only to discover they'd been caught in my family's web of lies. We trusted you, Mrs. Anderson apparently screamed at my mother by the pool. You said you were taking care of everything. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Emily, true to form, made everything worse. Oh, stop being such greedy beggars, she'd shouted back. If you can't afford a few nights in Hawaii, maybe your son isn't good enough for our family after all. James had stood there in shocked silence before finally speaking. You're right about one thing, he'd said quietly. Someone isn't good enough for someone's family. He'd pulled the engagement ring off Emily's finger and walked away with his parents. The engagement was over. Emily's dream wedding, cancelled before it even began. All because they couldn't resist the temptation to steal from me one last time. A week after they returned home, the knocking started. "Carrie, honey, please open the door." Mom's voice, trembling through the solid wood of my apartment door. "We need to talk." "We know we messed up." Dad's voice joined in. "Just give us a chance to explain." I sat on my couch, not moving, barely breathing. The TV was muted, but the blue light flickered across my face as they continued to plead. The knocking continued for 20 minutes before they finally gave up. I later heard they'd tried to get my building manager to let them in, claiming it was an emergency. He'd called to check with me first, and I'd told him not to let them up again. Rachel came over that night with takeout from Golden Dragon. We sat on my balcony, looking out over the city lights. "Your post got shared in some family trauma support groups," she said, picking at her noodles. "A lot of people are calling you their hero. Standing up to toxic family members, setting boundaries." I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, trying to prove I was worth something. All the money I'd given them, hoping it would finally make them see me as family, instead of just a resource to be used. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching a plane disappear into the night sky. "For the first time in my life, I don't care what they think of me. I don't care if they're sorry. I don't care if they change. I'm just done." Sometimes the hardest part of growing up isn't learning to stand on your own, it's learning when to walk away. I'd spent my whole life in Emily's shadow. Now it was time to step into the light.
Title: My parents tried to steal my inheritance to fund their golden child's college. Now they're begging me not to press charges after they did this. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit! Never thought I'd be sharing my story here, but here we are. This one's been sitting with me for a while, and honestly, I'm still processing everything. Writing it out might help, so here we go. I want to start by saying this. I am not my parents' favorite child. As much as it might sound dramatic or even petty, it's the only way to explain how things have always been in my family. Growing up, I always knew my family wasn't like everyone else's. People talk about unconditional love from parents, but honestly, I don't think that was ever in the cards for me. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. My sister Lisa is 23, my brother Tom is 21, and I just turned 20 last summer. From as far back as I can remember, my parents treated us differently, and not in subtle ways either. Lisa and Tom were the golden kids. Lisa always got straight A's and was the perfect daughter in my parents' eyes. Tom, on the other hand, was the rebel, but still managed to be their favorite. I was just there. I wasn't bad at school, but I wasn't a genius like Lisa. I wasn't causing chaos like Tom, so I guess I just faded into the background. It was clear I wasn't a priority. Birthdays are a perfect example. Lisa and Tom would get big celebrations, cakes, gifts, balloons, you name it. When it came to me, though, it was usually just a quick, "Oh, happy birthday," while everyone else got on with their day. One year, I remember asking my mom if I could have a small party like Lisa's. She just gave me a look and said, "Maybe next year." Spoiler, next year never came. By the time I hit my teens, I started to realize how much it bothered me. Not because I wanted lavish gifts or attention, but because it felt like I wasn't worth as much to them. I knew I couldn't rely on my parents for support, so when I was 13, I started doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, mowing lawns, washing cars, stuff like that. I saved every penny, and eventually I managed to buy my own things, like a secondhand laptop for school. Meanwhile, Lisa and Tom got brand new MacBooks handed to them the second they needed one. I tried not to let it get to me. I figured, hey, at least I'm learning to stand on my own 2 feet. But it was hard not to feel bitter sometimes, especially when my parents would make excuses for why they couldn't give me the same opportunities as my siblings. They'd say things like, "Lisa needs it for her classes," or "Tom just needs a little extra help right now." It was always something. The turning point came when I turned 18 and graduated high school. My parents didn't even ask if I wanted to go to college. They just assumed I'd figure it out on my own. Meanwhile, Lisa got full financial support for her studies, and Tom, well, he didn't stick to anything long enough to need support, but they still gave him money whenever he asked. By this point, I had learned not to expect much from them, so I decided to take a gap year after I finished high school and work, while I figured out my next steps. I got a part-time job, paid rent to my parents because I didn't want to be a freeloader, and started saving up for college. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to be independent. Then, later that year, everything changed. My grandfather passed away, and in his will, he left each of us grandkids a chunk of money to help with college or housing. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a real difference in my life. I finally felt like I had a shot at something better, until my parents decided to throw a wrench into my plans. The money he left us felt like a small victory for me. For once, I had a safety net. I could afford college without working ridiculous hours or taking out massive loans. It felt like my ticket out of this constant feeling of being overlooked and undervalued. Lisa's share went straight to her tuition. No questions, no drama, just smooth sailing as always. Tom, on the other hand, became the walking definition of a money pit. He started college around the same time, but couldn't stick to a single major for more than a semester. First, it was engineering because he wanted to build cool stuff. Then it was business because that's where the real money's at. After that, it was art because apparently he wanted to find his passion. Each switch cost a fortune, and he burned through his inheritance faster than anyone could have predicted. By the time my parents realized the money was almost gone, Tom was already talking about changing majors again. I remember overhearing my dad say, "Well, at least he's trying," while I was in the kitchen making dinner. I nearly laughed out loud. If that's what trying looks like, then I don't even want to know what failing would be. At first, I thought, not my problem. Both my siblings had already moved out. Lisa had graduated and landed a job in another state, and Tom was supposed to be living in a dorm, though I later found out he'd moved back home after burning through his money. I was the only one left in the house, still paying rent to my parents to avoid being labeled a freeloader. It felt unfair, especially since I was doing everything on my own, while my parents bent over backward for everyone else. Then my parents started dropping hints. It started small, comments about how families should support each other and how Tom just needs a little help to get back on track. I didn't think much of it, until one night, my mom sat me down in the living room. She had this overly sweet tone, the kind she uses when she's about to ask for something big. "We've been thinking," she began. "Tom has had a few setbacks, and he's really struggling to finish school. You're doing so well, and you're so responsible. Would you consider helping him out?" I stared at her, trying to process what she was asking. "Help him out how?" I asked, even though I already knew where this was going. "Well," she said, fidgeting with her hands, "your grandfather left you that money, but maybe you could give it to Tom for now? He'll pay you back once he graduates and gets a good job." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to give him my inheritance? The money that's supposed to help me pay for college?" She nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Think of it as an investment in the family. Tom's your brother, and he needs help. He'll return the favor when he's able." I didn't even know what to say at first. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Finally, I managed to respond. "Mom, I haven't even started college yet. If I give him that money, I won't be able to afford it. Why can't he just figure it out himself?" That's when she pulled the guilt trip. "He's your brother, and he's in a tough spot. You're young. You have time to figure things out. He's already behind, and if he can't finish school, it's going to ruin his future." I tried to stay calm, but my frustration was building. "So, I'm supposed to ruin my future instead? That's not fair." Her face hardened and her tone shifted. "Life isn't fair, and sometimes you have to make sacrifices for your family. Tom would do it for you." I almost laughed. Tom wouldn't lift a finger for me if his life depended on it. But I didn't say that. Instead, I stood up and told her, "I'm not giving him my money." End of discussion. She didn't take it well. The next day, my dad cornered me in the kitchen to back her up. "You need to think about the bigger picture," he said. "This isn't just about him, it's about the family." I just shook my head. "If it's about the family, why don't you and Mom help him? Why does it have to come from me?" "We've done everything we can," he replied. "It's your turn to step up." And that's when they dropped the ultimatum. If I didn't agree to give up my inheritance, they were going to raise my rent. They claimed the household expenses had increased since Tom moved back home, and that I should be paying more anyway. "We can't afford to support Tom's studies without your help," Mom said, as if it was my responsibility. "If you're not willing to contribute more, then maybe you need to find somewhere else to live." I was stunned. They were asking me to sacrifice everything I had worked for, and then punishing me for refusing. They wanted me to pay more rent, which they would then use to fund Tom's studies. It felt like a slap in the face. I was already paying more than my fair share, and now they were threatening to kick me out if I didn't fall in line. From that point on, my parents started giving me the silent treatment, only talking to me when they needed something. Tom avoided me altogether, probably because he knew I wasn't going to cave. They thought they could wear me down, but all it did was make me more determined to hold my ground. That money was my chance to get out of this cycle of being overlooked and used. I wasn't about to let them take that away from me. My dad wasn't much better, throwing in his own digs about how I was being selfish and not thinking about the bigger picture. The breaking point came one night during dinner. My mom brought up the rent situation again. "You know," she said, stirring her soup like she was talking about the weather, "it's not fair that we're struggling to keep things afloat while you sit on all that money." I stared at her, my appetite vanishing. "What do you mean struggling? I already pay rent every month, and it's not like Tom's contributing anything." She sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "Tom is in a tough spot right now. We're trying to help him get back on his feet, but that means we need everyone to pitch in. If you're not willing to share your inheritance, the least you can do is help cover the extra costs." "Extra costs?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So, you're asking me to pay more rent because Tom's living here for free? You're using my rent money to pay for his college, aren't you?" She didn't deny it. "We're doing what we have to do to keep this family together." I couldn't believe it. They were taking my hard-earned money, the money I worked for while juggling school and a part-time job, and funneling it to Tom, the golden child who couldn't stick to a major for more than a semester. "You're not keeping the family together," I snapped. "You're enabling him to keep screwing up while expecting me to clean up his mess." My dad, who had been quiet until now, decided to chime in. "If you don't want to contribute more, then maybe you should think about moving out." I was stunned. I looked at him, then at my mom, hoping one of them would realize how ridiculous this all sounded. But they didn't. They just stared back at me, like they had already made up their minds. "Are you serious?" I asked. "You're really going to kick me out because I won't pay for Tom's mistakes?" My dad shrugged. "You're an adult now. If you don't like the way things are, no one's forcing you to stay." That was it. Tom would always be the priority, no matter how much it cost me, or them. I didn't say another word. I got up from the table, walked to my room, and shut the door. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them bully me into giving up my inheritance or paying more rent. If they wanted me out, fine. I'd leave. But not before making sure I had a plan. I need to figure out how to handle this well. Now I'm asking you, Reddit. Should I consult a lawyer about protecting my inheritance? If they're willing to kick me out over this, what's to stop them from trying to manipulate their way into accessing my funds? Update 1. After that dinner, I spent the next few days in a haze trying to figure out what to do. Every time I thought I'd found a solution, reality would hit me like a brick wall. Moving out wasn't an option, at least not yet. I didn't have enough saved to cover rent, bills, and tuition. But staying in the house felt impossible. My parents' constant guilt-tripping and Tom's freeloading were wearing me down to the point where I could barely focus on work or planning my future. The idea of consulting a lawyer crossed my mind more than once. I needed to protect my inheritance, if not from outright theft, then at least from being manipulated into giving it up. But lawyers are expensive. I barely had enough money to keep my savings intact and pay rent. The thought of shelling out hundreds, maybe thousands, for legal advice felt completely out of reach. I tried looking up resources online, but everything I read just confused me more. Terms like probate, trustee, and beneficiary rights might as well have been written in another language. The more I researched, the more hopeless it all felt. I wasn't sure how to even start contacting a lawyer, much less how to pay for one. That's when I thought of my best friend, Jake. We've been close since we were kids, practically brothers. Whenever things got bad at home growing up, I'd bike over to Jake's house, no matter the time of day, and he and his parents would take me in without question. His family practically became a second home for me. Even now, Jake's the one person I know I can rely on, no matter what. I vented to Jake about everything that had been happening. He listened without interrupting, which is rare because Jake always has something to say. When I finally finished rambling about the mess with my parents and how I didn't know what to do about my inheritance, he leaned back and gave me this look. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You know, my brother's a lawyer," he said, like that answered everything. "You should talk to him." It took me a second to process what he was saying. I knew Jake's older brother, Ben, was some kind of lawyer, but I never put two and two together. "I don't know, man," I said. "Lawyers are expensive. I can't afford that right now. Jake rolled his eyes. First of all, Ben's not going to charge you for some basic advice. He's my brother, and you're practically family. Second, he specializes in stuff like this: wills, estates, inheritance stuff. He'll know what to do. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt I would finally do things how I wanted. Maybe I didn't have to face this alone. Maybe there was a way to protect what was mine, without ruining myself financially in the process. Now I just have to wait for Jake to get back to me. Do you think talking to a lawyer is the right move, Reddit? Is there anything I should prepare before meeting with him? A few days later, Jake called me with good news. His brother Ben was happy to help and had time to meet me that weekend. I knew this was my best shot at understanding my situation and figuring out how to handle my parents. When I arrived at Ben's office, he greeted me warmly, instantly putting me at ease. After some small talk, I explained everything: my grandfather's inheritance, the pressure from my parents to give it to Tom, the threats to raise my rent, and my concerns about them somehow accessing the money. Ben listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "You've got quite a situation on your hands," he said. "But the good news is, based on what you've told me, your parents can't touch the inheritance." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward. He explained that most inheritances like mine are placed in a trust, and unless my grandfather explicitly granted access to someone else, it's entirely mine. The trustee is legally bound to follow the instructions in the will, he said. Unless you've signed something giving someone else access, or they've forged something, which is a whole different issue, the money is untouchable by anyone but you, Ben said. But that doesn't mean they can't make your life difficult in other ways. That's why I'd recommend you start documenting everything. Keep a record of every conversation, every threat, every attempt to pressure you. Write down dates, times, and exactly what was said. If this ever escalates, like them trying to access the trust illegally, you'll need that evidence. It's also good to have a clear timeline if you decide to take legal action down the road. The idea of documenting everything made perfect sense. As I left Ben's office, I didn't feel lighter. I felt stronger. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting to my parents' manipulation. I had a strategy, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. The inheritance wasn't just money to me, it was my future, my independence, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. That night, I grabbed a notebook and sat at my desk with a clear purpose. I started jotting down everything I could remember from the past few weeks. I'm officially done bending over backward for people who don't see my worth. This time, I'll be ready to meet them head on. But things escalated quickly. A few days later, I overheard my parents whispering in the kitchen. They were discussing how to convince me to help Tom. Something about combining the rent increase with a promise to revisit the inheritance later. It was clear they thought I was naive enough to fall for it. They didn't know I was already planning my next move. That evening, I started quietly packing my things. I didn't rush. I wanted to be methodical, careful not to raise suspicion. I tucked my packed boxes into my closet and started looking for a place to stay. Jake had already offered to help me out if I needed it, but I wanted to try finding my own space first. Within a week, I found a small apartment a few towns over that fit my budget. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I paid the deposit, signed the lease, and set a date to move in, all without breathing a word to my parents. The night before the move, my dad called a family meeting in the living room. I knew it wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be another ambush. Still, I played along, sitting on the couch while my parents and Tom positioned themselves like a united front. It was almost comical how obvious they were about it. "We've been thinking," my dad began, his voice carrying that faux authoritative tone he always used when trying to guilt-trip me. "This situation isn't working for anyone. We're a family, and families solve problems together. It's time for you to make a decision." I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "I already have. I'm not giving up my inheritance, and I'm not paying more rent." My mom sighed dramatically, like she'd just been told I didn't love her anymore. "You're being so stubborn. This isn't about money, it's about helping your brother, helping his kids. Do you even understand the kind of pressure we're under?" I was not paying any of their shit, so I reviled. "I'm moving out," I said plainly, leaning back in my chair. "I've already found a place, and I'll be gone by tomorrow." My mom's face went pale, and my dad's jaw tightened. "You're moving out?" My mom finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Where are you going to go? How can you afford this?" "I've already sorted it out," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "I have a lease signed and a plan in place." "But why would you leave?" she continued, her voice rising in pitch. "You don't need to go anywhere. You have everything you need here. This is your home." "No," I said firmly, meeting her gaze. This stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Without waiting for a response, I walked to my room and closed the door. I could hear muffled voices behind me as they tried to process what had just happened, but I didn't care. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone dictate how I lived it anymore. The next morning, I left before anyone was awake. As I drove away, I didn't feel regret or sadness. I felt free. Stick around for the next update. Things are far from over, and the real drama is just about to unfold. Update 2: It had been a couple of weeks since I moved out, and while I wasn't in college yet, I was finally able to think clearly and make plans for my future. I was saving every penny I could, preparing to enroll in the upcoming semester. A few weeks after I moved out, I thought things had finally settled. Sure, my parents still sent me guilt-tripping texts, but I ignored them. For once, I felt like I was in control of my life. But then, Tom's college situation came crashing down, dragging everyone back into chaos. It started with a call from Lisa, of all people. She rarely got involved in family drama, but her voice was tense when she called me one evening. "Have you heard about Tom?" she asked. "No," I said cautiously. "What now?" "He's been kicked out of college," she said flatly. Apparently, he didn't meet the academic requirements again. I couldn't say I was surprised. Tom had been changing majors and coasting on half-hearted effort for years. "What are Mom and Dad doing about it?" I asked, already bracing for the answer. "They're scrambling," Lisa replied. "He's burned through his inheritance, so they're trying to figure out how to get him back in. I think they're planning to take out a loan to cover tuition." I sighed, shaking my head. "Of course they are. Why hold him accountable when they can just throw more money at the problem?" Lisa hesitated. "That's not all. They've been talking about you. Mom's convinced you'll change your mind and use your inheritance to pay for Tom's tuition. She thinks you just need a wake-up call to realize how important this is for the family." I laughed bitterly. "Unbelievable. They're still trying to drag me into this?" Lisa sighed. "You know how they are. They won't let it go." The next day, the guilt-tripping escalated. My mom called, her tone dripping with desperation. "Tom is going through such a hard time," she began, skipping right over any pleasantries. "He's trying so hard to turn things around, but the school won't give him another chance unless we pay up front for the next semester." I stayed silent, waiting for the inevitable. "We were thinking," she continued, "that you could help, just this once. Use some of your inheritance to cover his tuition, and we'll make sure he stays on track this time. It's the least you can do for your brother." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "That money is for my future, not to bail Tom out of his mistakes." Her tone shifted instantly, becoming colder. "How can you be so selfish? He's your brother. He's trying to make something of himself, and you're just sitting on money you don't even need yet." "I'm not selfish, Mom," I replied. "I'm responsible." Something Tom could stand to learn. She hung up on me after that. Then Tom called, and his tone was even more desperate than usual. "Look, I know I've screwed up," he started, "but this is my last chance. I've found a program that's perfect for me. I just need a little help to get started." I cut him off. "Tom, no. You've had plenty of chances. I'm not using my money to bail you out again. You're not even in college," he shouted, his frustration boiling over. "You're sitting on that money for nothing while I'm trying to make something of myself." "You're not trying," I snapped back. "You're expecting everyone else to clean up your messes. I'm not doing it anymore." Then he muttered, "You'll regret this," and hung up. A few days later, Lisa called again, this time with a warning. "Mom and Dad went to the trustee overseeing your inheritance," she said. "They're trying to convince them to release the money early." "What?" I said, my heart sinking. "They can't do that. It's in trust." "They're desperate," she said. "But don't worry. It sounds like the school told them there's nothing they can do without your consent." I immediately called Ben, Jake's lawyer brother, to make sure everything was secure. He confirmed that the trust was airtight and advised me to keep documenting everything. "If they try anything shady, you'll have the evidence to protect yourself," he said. Without access to my inheritance, my parents decided to co-sign a loan for Tom's tuition, putting themselves even deeper in debt. Meanwhile, Tom's academic career finally hit a dead end. The private program they enrolled him in dropped him after just one semester when he failed to meet their standards. Instead of holding him accountable, my parents doubled down on blaming me. They called, texted, and even sent letters, all variations of the same message. I'd abandoned the family. I ignored all of it. I wasn't going to let their poor decisions derail my life anymore. Months later, I finally enrolled in college, using my inheritance to cover tuition and living expenses. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to focus on my future without the weight of my family's expectations holding me back. As for Tom, he's still living with my parents, working a string of dead-end jobs, and complaining about how life isn't fair. My parents continue to enable him, but their finances are stretched thin. They've made their choices, just like I've made mine. The next day, I called Ben, Jake's lawyer brother, and explained the situation. He immediately pulled up the trust documentation and contacted the trustee. A few hours later, he called me back, sounding serious. "They tried to forge your signature," he said bluntly. The trustee flagged it right away. They submitted a request to access the funds, claiming it was on your behalf, but the paperwork didn't match up. The trustee reported it as fraudulent. I was stunned. Even though I knew my parents were desperate, I hadn't expected them to stoop this low. What happens now? The trustee filed a formal complaint, Ben said, and I've forwarded the details to the proper authorities. If you want, you can let this play out legally, or we can try to settle it quietly. For a moment, I felt nothing but clarity. This wasn't a decision to be weighed. It was a line they had crossed, and there was no going back. "No," I said firmly. "They've made their choices. Let it play out." The situation escalated quickly. My parents were served with legal documents accusing them of attempting to commit fraud by forging my signature. They were forced to hire a lawyer, and the fines alone were substantial. I found out through Lisa that they dipped into their savings to pay the legal fees and were scrambling to cover the costs. Tom, of course, was furious. He called me one evening, ranting about how I'd betrayed the family. "You didn't have to take it this far," he yelled. "It's not like they were stealing it. They were just trying to help me." "Trying to help you by committing fraud?" I shot back. "Do you even hear yourself, Tom? This is exactly why I had to leave. You and Mom and Dad think you're entitled to whatever you want no matter the cost. They're your parents," he shouted. "They've done so much for you, and this is how you repay them?" I didn't bother arguing. "I'm done with this conversation, Tom." The fallout was brutal, for them at least. The court ultimately imposed a hefty fine on my parents and issued a formal warning that any further attempts to access the trust would lead to harsher penalties. They narrowly avoided criminal charges, but the financial hit was significant. Now my parents are left picking up the pieces. Their finances are in shambles, and Tom's college dreams are officially over. He's stuck in a dead-end job, still living at home, and still blaming everyone but himself. As for me, I've finally enrolled in college, using my inheritance exactly as my grandfather intended. It feels like a fresh start, a chance to focus on my future without the weight of my family's expectations holding me back. I always keep reminding myself that I didn't choose this path. They did. By trying to manipulate and control me, they forced me to take a stand. And for the first time in my life, I'm proud of myself for doing just that. To everyone who's taken the time to read my story, thank you. If you're facing a similar struggle, remember this. It's not selfish to put yourself first. You deserve to be valued. And if the people around you can't respect your boundaries, it's okay to walk away and prioritize your own well-being. Sometimes, protecting your peace means choosing yourself.